Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph Pudetti. This is going to be chapter 9 of our Leadership Challenge book, Strengthening Others. As we know, because we're all in the same class together, this is with Professor Celestia Bates. And for me, I'm sure for some of you as well, this is our last class in our program. So I'm excited to get started here and very thankful for this program. Okay, here we go. So we're starting with the quote here from page 225 in Koz's book, Leadership Challenge. And this quote says, is not about having more power, but empowering and enabling others around you to be leaders. The reason I wanted to start this presentation with this quote is because I think intellectually we can all understand that leadership isn't necessarily about having more power. But the reality is when we get into positions of higher amounts of leadership, there's a fear that seeps in that when I give power away, the quality of my work is going to go down. Or when I give power away, I'm not going to have as much control over the outcome. And there's a John Maxwell term about uncapping the lid. And one thing that I have seen time and time again in my own leadership and throughout the Masters of Organizational Leadership program is that if I try and be the smartest person in the room, or if I try to impose my beliefs on other people and my opinions on other people, rather than seeking the best out of everyone in the room, what happens is I actually cap and lid the capacity, or I become a bottleneck of myself in the organization. So I love this quote because it's not about more power. Leadership isn't about more power. It's about empowering and enabling others around us to be leaders. So this chapter in particular talks about a few things. It talks about how exemplary leaders both provide, enhance, and develop the people that they're leading. So we're going to jump right into the first one, which is how exemplary leaders provide. On page 219, there's an awesome quote that says, "Before people can feel comfortable stretching themselves, they must feel competent in their abilities and in their roles." And in this section, it gives a few different ways to go about doing that. But the biggest thing and the biggest theme in this section that I saw is about clarity. Now, when you know what you need to do and when you're empowered to do it, it becomes much easier to do so. So the first thing that they talk about is this concept of developing a playbook. What does it look like to get in the nitty gritty and say, this is what needs to happen and this is what needs to happen? And that leads to the next step, because when you say this is what needs to happen and this is what needs to happen, it can sound a lot like micromanaging. But there's a distinct difference between micromanaging and empowerment. And actually, one of the reflection questions is on this concept itself. And what I love about this book is it talks about the differences between empowerment and micromanaging. And I think one of the key distinctives for me as I was reading the book is that although you can get in the nitty gritty and say, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, the difference is that micromanaging is saying, this is how, this is when, and this is what. And you go through every single line and you check in with the person. But empowerment says, these are the goals, these are the distinctives, this may even be how, but you're giving the person who's doing it clear ability to have some autonomy in some of the things that they're doing. And there's much more of a dialogue when people are empowered. The third point that they point out of a strategy to provide is understanding goals. Now, Brene Brown talks about in her book, Clear is Kind, that clarity is kindness. That's a term that we use a lot in the organization that I work in. And I think the reason we use it a lot is because transparently, there's a lot of unclarity. There's a lot of unclear expectations. So we use the term clarity is kindness because we're constantly trying to become more clear with what our roles and our responsibilities and what things are going on. Because when we're unclear, for example, I've worked, I don't know, maybe you have as well, but I've worked on projects and gotten to the end and done this and that and the other thing. And then I get to a certain point and I talk to my supervisor and they had a completely different expectation for what I was supposed to be working on. And the reason that happened because there was an unclarity of expectation. So one of the key moments here is that they talk about understanding goals and providing clarity. And then 4, and I love this one, is that you turn constituents into leaders. So when we are leading other people, our heart and our primary motive isn't for them to be underneath us and for them to just learn from us. We actually want to look at what is beautiful and awesome and unique and their gifts and talents are, and bolster them up so that they can actually lead. And what that does is it puts our organization in a better place, so that you're not only becoming a better leader, but the people underneath you are leading other people as well. So this section, we're talking about enhancing self-determination. And the first part about it, it talks about how you actually become more powerful when you practice giving power away. This concept is mirrored in Christian faith, where it says that the first will be last and the last shall be first, right? So when we actually take the practice of saying, I'm going to be a servant leader and I'm going to put myself as a servant, so I'm learning from people. I'm not overpowering people. I'm giving people enhanced self-determination. I'm saying that your drive is going to positively impact me, and how can I enhance that? It creates a positive culture. It also talks about how people who feel weak tend to underperform. It talks about how people who feel weak also, it leads to a culture of self-protection. And when you work against that, it gives people back self-control. And self-control is something that people are longing for, especially in 2025 as people are entering back into the workplace. So the way that it talks about these 3 things are providing choices, structure jobs to provide latitude, and fostering accountability. So we're going to jump into the providing choices section first. And providing choices is... it's one of those kind of like tricky things, right? So it talks about starting by asking questions and building trust, right? A quote in this section that I loved was, people can't learn to think from themselves, take initiative, and be self-directed if leaders are always telling them what to do and how to do it. So as leaders, we have to learn how to give up control in some cases, right? In some contexts, in order to provide choices for people so that they know that they have a sense of autonomy to do their job. The next part talks about structuring jobs to offer latitude. And what that means, there's this concept of meaningful discretion, right? And that basically means that people get to make decisions that will effectively affect their work in particular. It gives people the freedom of movement to get things done. And then the last thing is fostering accountability. And it talks about this idea of psychological ownership. I loved the metaphor in this section that talked about renting a car and not cleaning it. I don't know how many of you are guilty of saying, you know, I got my rental car for the week, I'm going out and I'm doing it, but we don't necessarily wash our rental car and do all of the things that we would do for our own car because we're renting it. And it talks about how so many people feel like they're renting their job. And we could, as a society, look at how people aren't stepping up to the plate. But I think that often what happens is people are not actually empowered by leadership within their organizations to actually feel like they own their job, because we're looked at as cogs in the machine. So, some strategies that this talks about in order to kind of counteract the natural tendency to micromanage is pointing out the natural tendency against accountability, right? Would be, in order to foster accountability, it talks about pointing out people's successes, especially doing that in a public context so that people can see what you're highlighting and, oh, that's something that we love and we strive for. Talks about creating group interdependence, and that talks about, instead of the boss being the person that holds people accountable, but the peers start holding each other accountable. And then it talks about, and this was referenced earlier in the book, right, about connecting values. And in this section, it talks in particular about writing personal mission statements so that people's personal mission statement actually aligns with what the group is striving for as well. This next section is talking about competence and confidence. And it talks about the idea of how it's so disempowering to have a ton of responsibilities and not fully be empowered to know or how to know what needs to be done. I have found this to be true for me in multiple organizations. As I stated before, there was a very clear reason I went to school for organizational leadership, and this is one of those reasons. When I was working in New York City, I was the development and education director, and I got hired to be the person who came up with the curriculum and onboarded and trained a staff of about 150 employees, seasonal employees for our summer camps. And one thing that constantly came up was the fact that I was given roles and given responsibilities to put together a training manual and put together our curriculum for the season. And I would go through and I would do it, and I'd get to the end and I would sit down with my boss, and he would basically tell me that everything that I had worked on was not right and didn't fit the context of what was going on. And that happened so many times over the course of 10 months that I eventually got to the point where I was like, I can no longer work in this environment because I don't know what the expectations are. I didn't feel confident and I didn't feel competent to do the role. In that role in particular, I noticed that of the staff of about 15 full-time people, the turnaround for staff was less than a year and a half for most people. So by the time that I'd gone there, I'd already seen a whole slew of turnover. That was a common theme there, and I think that this is one of the things that they, in particular, were trying to work on and hadn't quite gotten to a point where there was a culture of enhancing people's competence and confidence. So the way that this book talks about this concept is in four ways. It says that as leaders, it's our role to educate and share information. Great workplaces train people well. One of the ways that we go about doing that is we ask a lot of questions, and the intention there is to close gaps of knowledge and understanding. We want the people that are working with us, and we want the people that are working alongside of us not to be out of the loop, but to be in the loop as much as possible. We want to organize our work and build confidence. So this is one of those ways where it's like what we're doing is we're trying to remove all unnecessary tasks and boundaries, and we're willing to set up new structures that are going to satisfy the needs of the current moment that we're in within our organization. The next thing it talks about is fostering self-confidence. Confidence affects performance. They have scientific proof of that. So words matter. Sharing that you believe in people helps them to believe in themselves. And coaching and mentoring. People can't do what they can't do. So in the current role that I'm in, we actually have an internship college program that meets in the campus that I work in. I'm a nonprofit director and associate pastor at a church, and we have a program where students go to college and they also are getting internship experience simultaneously. And one thing that I've noticed is that our interns tend to thrive in situations where the person that they're reporting to coaches them and empowers them to do the things that they're asking of them. That might seem a little like duh, but I also see the other side of the spectrum where people that they report to just say, do this, do this, do this, and do this. And what I see the interns that I know and love is they start to close off and they stop being as productive. Like they still get the work done, but they're not as productive. They don't take as much initiative, and they don't give as much of themselves. They're kind of a little bit less alive, to be honest. And the distinct difference isn't them. It's the leader's willingness to say, oh, you don't necessarily know how to do this. Let me coach you and mentor you in being able to do this. And I don't necessarily think, actually, I think this concept is tied to how we function in our roles as well. It's not just interns, but as people who get further along in their career, we get a little bit more grit. We understand like, I just got to figure this out. But in reality, psychologically, there's a safety in knowing that I work in an organization that when I get asked to do something, I'm going to be coached and mentored, and I'm going to know how to do it, and I'm going to know how to thrive in doing that. I think it's really powerful. We're at our response section here. So my prompt for us this week is there's four different line items of questions here. I'm not going to ask everyone to go over all four, but I'd love to have a discussion, and you can choose whichever two you want to answer. But could you please at least respond to two out of the following line of questions? The first one is describe a moment when you had to relinquish control. What was that experience like for you? What was the outcome, and what did you learn? Not necessarily looking for positive outcomes here, just looking for real answers. The second question is, what is the difference between micromanaging and empowering? And have you ever seen this played out successfully? And when I say see this, have you ever seen out someone successfully empowering someone? Yes. And then number three, when have you been empowered by a leader, and how did that affect your ability to succeed in your role? The last question, when have you felt powerless in a role, and what contributed to your feelings of powerlessness in that role? Here's my reference page. And then, because we've been going through this program together, I just wanted to introduce my family. That's me, my wife, Elissa, and my daughter, OJ. We were celebrating our 5-year wedding anniversary this past January. And we have our daughter, MJ, Mira Jane, short for Miriam Jane, who's going to be coming later this month. Guys, I'm so thankful for you. I'm thankful for this organization, this program, and just wishing you the best as you move on to your new endeavors post-graduation. Okay. Have a great day, everyone.